Hey folks, welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, broadcasting from the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem, alongside Alex Traiman, the CEO of JNS. A lot to cover this week, Alex. Top story, there's a major question I want to ask. Is the Middle East returning to an all-out war? Is Israel changing its posture towards the strategic threat which we face? We'll start with Iran. U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday warning Iran, quote, very bad things will happen if it fails to reach a nuclear deal, after Tehran responded to a letter from the U.S. president in which he called for talks. Let's go to the videotape.
Iran is very high on my list of things to watch. And as you probably know, I sent them a letter just recently. And I said, you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. And we're going to either have to talk it out, or very bad things are going to happen to Iran. And I don't want that to happen. I don't want that to happen. My big preference, and I don't say this through strength or weakness, my big preference is we work it out with Iran. But if we don't work it out, bad things are going to happen to Iran.
So there you have President Trump saying that he would not sit idly by while the Iranians threaten the U.S. and its allies. Iran has already responded to the president, saying Tehran would strike U.S. bases in the region if Washington follows through on its warning of military consequences for Iran in the absence of a new nuclear deal. This, according to the Speaker of the Iranian parliament. He added, if the Americans attack the sanctity of Iran, the entire region will blow up like a spark in an ammunition dump. He said their bases and those of their allies will not be safe. Alex, a lot to break down here with Iran.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you see both the Trump administration and the Iranians beating the drums of war. For President Trump, he has decided that a nuclear Iran would tremendously destabilize the region beyond anything we've seen until now. Now, Iran is not a peaceful nation. Iran has funded terror proxies, armed terror proxies across the region, destabilized the majority of the Middle East. Hezbollah, Houthis, Hamas, all Iranian-backed terror proxies attacking Israel. Israel's been in war now for nearly a year and a half. Iran itself has fired more than 300 ballistic missiles directly at Israel in two separate attacks, in addition to cruise missiles and drones. So nobody can say here that the tough talk on Iran is without any merit. Trump, unlike Biden, unlike President Obama before that, I believe really understands that if Iran gets a nuclear umbrella, that's going to hold the entire region, the entire world hostage. He doesn't want an attack. I mean, that's what he's saying. He's saying that he prefers to have some kind of negotiated settlement. What does that look like? That would demand that the United States and other peacekeepers would come in and dismantle the nuclear program, that they would have access to all the nuclear facilities. They would come in over a period of time and dismantle the entirety of the Iranian nuclear program. Now, the Iranians cannot be trusted in any sort of negotiations. So President Trump using the credible threat of a military strike in order to get the Iranians to the negotiation table in a serious way.
So as that is all going on, Israel defending itself on multiple fronts. On Wednesday, we were told that the Cabinet Secretary Yossi Fuchs said that Israel is establishing a permanent security zone both in Lebanon and in Syria, as well as in Gaza. Unequivocally, he said the security zones in Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria are permanent zones. At the same time, Israel bombing a drone storage facility the other day in Lebanon after Hezbollah once again returned to firing rockets at Kiryat Shmona. That's a city on the northern border. Hezbollah's Secretary General threatening Israel over the strikes and any permanent Israeli presence in Lebanon.
Well, I think you're seeing now also that Israel is changing its posture toward the rest of the region, now being backed by Trump. Now that you have an alignment, Netanyahu and his cabinet secretary, Yossi Fuchs, they are saying the things that they felt they were unable to say in the earlier phases of the war. Never able to say, we're going to stay in Gaza permanently. We're going to take a buffer zone permanently in Gaza. We're going to stay in southern Lebanon permanently. We're going to take the land that we took when Israel had a very sharp military action to dismantle the Syrian military after the fall of Bashar Assad permanently. understanding that only Israel can protect the security of the state of Israel and needs these strategic zones in order to do that. But Fuchs and Netanyahu may be setting the stage for more permanent hold of land in the territory.
I want to focus on Gaza now. Israel planning a renewed offensive in Gaza. There's talk of a major battle plans for Gaza, perhaps more and more battalions of reservists, IDF reservists being called up. Prime Minister Netanyahu also appearing to endorse a harder line on Gaza. Let's jump out to that video.
ככל שהחמאס יתמיד בסרבנותו לשחרר את חטופינו, המכבש שנפעיל יהיה עוצמתי יותר ויותר, ואני אומר לכם, חברי הכנסת, אני אומר את זה גם לחמאס. זה כולל תפיסת שטחים, וזה כולל עוד דברים שאני לא אפרט כאן.
So again, with President Trump, a great friend in the White House, Prime Minister Netanyahu threatening to take control over territory in that coastal enclave to pressure Hamas to release the remaining Israeli hostages. Major battle plans in the works, Alex.
Well, I think this is more than just taking over some of the territory in Gaza. Israel is now preparing to install full military rule over the Gaza Strip. Unlike the previous offensive, that was led by the former IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, Israel now has a new Chief of Staff, Eyal Zamir, and they are preparing new battle plans which could send as many as 4 battalions into Gaza, 1 from the north, 1 from the south near Rafah, and 2 basically cutting through the middle of the strip. That would enable Israel to establish its rule over the entirety of Gaza. We're seeing Israel currently retaking the Netzarim corridor, which they had ceded during the ceasefire that allowed for the return of dozens of hostages. They are retaking military bases that they had established inside the Gaza Strip and then abandoned as they pulled troops out to facilitate that ceasefire as well. And these are things, again, that Israel was not able to say before when the Biden administration was in power. We're starting to see the plan for a day after really being facilitated now. And I think we'll only learn what the full final plan is for Gaza in the weeks ahead. But certainly Netanyahu feeling emboldened, understanding that he has the backing of the Trump administration to break the ceasefire, to go back in and to really take out Hamas, which has been rearming, regrouping, taking control of all of the humanitarian aid that's inside Gaza. Israel wants Hamas out of the Gaza Strip. They want them demilitarized. They want something on the day after. And they understand that the only way that you get to something on the day after is if Israel replaces in the short term Hamas as the military and the governing body inside the Gaza Strip.
So this week, Israel did take out a senior Hamas spokesperson, Abdul Latif Al-Kono. He was killed in an Israeli airstrike in the Jabalia area in northern Gaza. But at the same time, Hamas remains defiant. The terrorist organization says they will not lay down their arms no matter what. Not in any part of a ceasefire agreement. According to a senior Hamas official during an interview over the weekend, they're not prepared to lay down their arms at any price, under any terms.
Well, Netanyahu understands that the only way that you're going to be able to negotiate for the hostages' return at this point is with the threat of overwhelming force. It's almost parallel to what we just talked about with Trump vis-a-vis Iran. If you want to negotiate the dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program, you have to show that there's a credible military threat. Trump is threatening Iran with bad things, very bad things. He's also demonstrating to Iran with his attacks on the Houthis that the United States is not afraid to operate militarily in the area. And so too here with Hamas, they're saying that they're not willing to lay down their arms, which is one of Netanyahu's conditions. So Netanyahu is showing that he's willing to at least mobilize troops for overwhelming force inside Gaza in order to get Hamas to reconsider this position here that they won't lay down their arms, and also to reconsider the position that they won't let go of the hostages.
Speaking of Hamas and Gaza, this was a pretty unique scenario which played out over the last several days. Arab protesters coming out against Hamas rule in Gaza, And Prime Minister Netanyahu is saying that Israel's approach to the terrorist organization, putting more pressure on them militarily, is working. Let's check out the video.
שאף פעם לא ראינו כמותו. ראינו הפגנות גדולות, גלויות ברצועת עזה נגד שלטון החמאס. זה מראה שהמדיניות שלנו עובדת.
So again, let's be clear here. The people who are coming out to protest, they are not peaceful Zionists or Israel-loving individuals. These are the same people that were involved in the October 7th massacre. They're saying they've had enough, and there are a lot of ways we can try to understand what's happening here. I saw Dr. Mordechai Kedar, expert on the Middle East, say this week that the protests are actually being organized by Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas's party, against Hamas. There are those who are saying that perhaps it's all a show, that Hamas is organizing the protests themselves to make it look like people, that they're giving people freedom to express themselves. What do you make of all these protests?
Well, certainly important to recognize that the people that are protesting Hamas today were in many cases celebrating Hamas on October 7th. It's not that they're ideologically opposed to what Hamas tried to do to Israel and think, that that's just not the way in which Palestinians should behave. It's just that they see now that Hamas is not able to deliver the goods. They see that Netanyahu is now mobilizing the IDF for a renewed offensive in the Gaza Strip. So however bad the situation in Gaza is today, it's likely to only get much worse. And that Hamas not only can't they protect the civilians in Gaza or provide for them electricity, food, or an economy, or any of the things that they were once responsible for, but they're also a failure in their ability to defeat the state of Israel. So that's why you're starting to see the people turn on them. Now, there's been rumors out there, and people have written that they think that it's Hamas themselves that are organizing the protests to make it look like there are innocent Palestinians there, and if the innocent Palestinians are protesting Hamas, then you should not go back in and to militarily occupy the strip or lead an offensive there. I've been talking to more and more reservists that have been inside Gaza for a long time. Just over this weekend, I had an extended conversation with a reservist who is part of the combat engineering. They literally were going building to building inside the Gaza Strip. Not only did he tell me that the buildings were all storage houses for weapons, all entrances to tunnel infrastructure deep underground, but even that the buildings themselves, the houses, the overwhelming majority of civilian houses were booby-trapped, ready to explode when the IDF came in. What that means is that you have a society of people that are complicit in Hamas's attack. They helped Hamas facilitate this attack. They allowed their homes, their schools, their mosques, their hospitals to be used as military bases against the IDF. So the fact that now they are, some of them are protesting, I don't think it has to do anything with Hamas trying to create the appearance that their society is innocent. Their society is completely complicit in all of this. I could understand why Fatah might be organizing some of these protests, because they want to also demonstrate that Hamas's way is a failure. And if they organize these protests in Gaza, they're hoping perhaps that could further strengthen their hold in Judea and Samaria, where they've been also losing popularity to Hamas.
Right.
And the reason why they've been losing popularity is because Palestinians not only see the corruption of Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah, but they believe that Hamas is the only one that's actually taking up arms against Israel. But Fatah is now able to turn around and say, oh, Hamas's way is successful. Look what happens when you jump the gun and attack Israel militarily. Then again, you're now fighting the IDF, which is a huge army, a battle-ready military, technologically superior military, and you see what they did to Gaza. So Fatah is trying to tell the people in the West Bank and in Palestinian-controlled areas, we call it here Judea and Samaria, that the Fatah way of going slow, of wearing a suit, of trying to delegitimize Israel in the international forums is actually much more effective in the long run than the Hamas strategy, which just draws in the IDF. But But certainly, I think no matter how you slice it, there's just no way whatsoever that you can consider the Palestinian people complicit. They've literally been taught to hate. They've been incentivized to kill. And now their society is paying the price for supporting both Fatah, which is corrupt and incentivizes terror, and Hamas, which organized the worst pogrom massacre in Israeli history on October 7th.
Yeah, Fatah have been using that strategy since the early 90s with the Oslo Accords, trying to destroy Israel in stages. But as you have the protesters there in Gaza against Hamas, whomever they may be, you also have groups who want to take advantage of the Trump proposal, which is the immigration or voluntary immigration of Gazans out of Gaza to other neighboring countries. For the first time, you had 100 PA Arabs, or Arabs living under Hamas in Gaza, to be precise, who are going to Indonesia for employment in the construction sector. Who knows if they're going to come back? It's a pilot program. At the same time, Prime Minister Netanyahu directing Mossad intelligence agency to identify countries that would be willing to take in large numbers of displaced Arabs from Gaza. We've spoken about potentially Jordan, Egypt, Indonesia's now in the mix, and maybe now we're talking about other countries.
Yeah, it could be Syria, it could be Sudan, it could be Somaliland. The Mossad is not looking for different countries that could take them. Indonesia, sounds perfect, I think, to a lot of Israelis due to the fact that it is just so far away from the state of Israel. It's a country with over 280 million people, of which the overwhelming majority, I think something like 240 million of them are Muslims. The overwhelming majority of those Muslims are Sunni Muslims, just like Palestinians. Now the question is, how can this be facilitated? Would the Trump administration, would the international community help to facilitate that? Would Gazans potentially be given some kind of an exit package to leave to help them establish a new life in another country? But understanding that right now, the United States, the Europeans, others are not going to be flushing billions of dollars worth of cash to rebuild Gaza in the current scenario. Understanding that the IDF may come in and have a new military operation, a military operation which could be a lot different than the previous operation. A military operation that could include a lot more air power, right? You remember that in the first operation, Israel really withheld the use of a lot of air power. One, because the Biden administration didn't want them to do it. Two, because the Biden administration was saying that they weren't willing to resupply Israel if they used these more expensive munitions. So Israel just was blowing things up the old-fashioned way with combat engineers, basically putting explosives inside buildings. So now you might get the Air Force coming back in, attacking with precision. It's likely to cause a lot more damage. It's going to push Palestinians down into very tight humanitarian zones. And it's just not a place where you want to live. So if you have an option to leave, we're already seeing reports that polls being taken of Gazans in the street. Again, they don't support what Hamas is doing anymore because Hamas cannot deliver the goods. And they would support the opportunity to emigrate and to resettle elsewhere. If that happens, that's a paradigm shifter. That changes the whole strategic equation of the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It takes away the parity between the sizes of the populations. It makes it clear that the Jewish people are the overwhelming majority of peoples between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. It removes any of the accusations of apartheid. And ultimately, I think this is really what Israel wants, to be able to facilitate the exit of Gazans. As Netanyahu said, the Gazans that want to leave.
In parallel to Israel's military preparations, there is potentially a new hostage deal on the table. Israel confirmed Saturday night it received new ceasefire hostage release proposals from mediating countries and said it has made a counteroffer. So it didn't accept the offer on the table, so to speak. It made a counteroffer in coordination, by the way, with the United States. This after media reports earlier on Saturday that Hamas had agreed to an Egyptian proposal to release 5 living hostages in exchange for a 50-day ceasefire. So even with all the other stuff going on, there is still potential here of a ceasefire deal, at least temporarily, and the release of some of the remaining Israeli hostages being held by Hamas in the dungeons of Gaza.
Well, from what I read, that Hamas had agreed to release 5 hostages, of which some are living, in exchange for a 50-day ceasefire. So that might not even be 5 living hostages. And a 50-day ceasefire Hamas is playing for time right now. They want ceasefire to last as long as possible. And they're hoping that the longer it lasts, the less likely Israel is to return to a military offensive in the Gaza Strip. Israel has rejected this proposal. It doesn't seem to be a fair proposal. Israel did come with a counteroffer where it would get 11 hostages back in exchange for some kind of a ceasefire. So I don't necessarily think that we're getting close to another hostage release situation, but I do think that Israel's going to have to renew its military operation. It's going to have to really put Hamas on the ropes. They're going to need to understand that the gig is up, that their rule in Gaza is over, that Israel is committed to renewing the fighting, that the United States has Israel's back, that the international institutions that were delegitimizing and demonizing Israel, like the International Criminal Court, the UN General Security Council, International Court of Justice, no longer have any influence over the decisions of the Israeli government. I think once that happens, then you're going to see Hamas crying, and they're going to potentially take an offer from Israel more seriously to have an exit ramp, to leave the Gaza Strip, to let the Hamas leadership get out, whether they go to Qatar, whether they go to Turkey, whether they go to Indonesia or anywhere else, and the return of the hostages in exchange for an end of hostilities, like a real ceasefire deal that gives Israel everything that it wants.
I want to switch gears here. This is a potential bombshell report here coming from Tamir Morag, the Channel 14, that's Israeli television diplomatic correspondent, who tweeted the following. Fascinating details from the official letters sent by the U.S. Congress to the Movement for Quality Government, the Blue and White Future Association, and other organizations involved in the Kaplan protests. That's what we're talking about here, which are now officially under American investigation on suspicion of undermining Israel's democratic order. Congress has issued an ultimatum demanding the transfer of all relevant documents related to grants these organizations received from the Biden administration, including a breakdown of expenses and their purposes, by April 9th at 5 p.m. The investigated organizations are warned not to destroy or alter any evidence, including text messages and relevant communications from cell phones of their employees. The letter notes that alongside supporting these organizations, allegedly aiming to undermine Israel's democratic regime, the Biden administration, and here we're getting to the point, through the State Department and U.S. aid, quote, provided direct support to Hamas and other terrorist organizations. A potential bombshell here, Alex.
Oh, absolutely. And now you're really seeing how the Congress does truly support Israel. This is now like Brian Mast, the head of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Congress, is a real Israel supporter, as opposed to the Bernie Sanders and Rashida Tlaib's and others determining what the policies of the Congress are going to be, how much the tide has turned with the Trump administration in office instead of the Biden administration. Now, I don't know that U.S. aid and the State Department have provided the overwhelming majority of the funding that has gone towards the Kaplan Force protests, the anti-government protests here, but certainly some money was sent. We already know through previous reports that State Department had given, several tens of thousands of dollars to this movement for quality government. By the way, this movement for quality government, it sounds like it's some kind of a neutral body that just deals with, this party, that party. They have brought petition after petition after petition against Netanyahu. The head of the movement for quality government was at the front of the judicial reform protest movement. Okay, so this is all an organized strategy. And what the U.S. Congress is now saying is the U.S. government can have no part in trying to undermine the democracy in Israel. We saw over and over again the Biden administration early in this war trying to delegitimize Netanyahu. You had the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, calling openly for Israel to go to elections so that Israelis could pick another prime minister aside from Netanyahu. So we really saw over and over again how the previous administration was trying to undermine the will of the Israeli people that voted for Prime Minister Netanyahu over and over and over again, and his coalition of supporters. And I think that more than anything, what this report does is it just brings light to the fact that there is a lot of dark money going into these protests. I mean, you start to see now on the streets here, just a few hundred meters from the office on the side of a building, there's a gigantic billboard, against Minister of Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, saying that 59 people, count on him. Of course, of those 59, it's believed that more than half of them are already dead. But that's not the point. The point is that millions and millions of dollars in signage and organization and organizing protests and paying protesters to be out in the streets, there's a lot of dark money here that's really going towards trying to overthrow the government. So, you start, and then you're also seeing the total opposite of the use of America's soft power to influence. We saw the Biden administration putting sanctions, on quote unquote settlers that were violent, hadn't been convicted of any crimes in an Israeli court. And here you're really seeing the absolute opposite of that, which is the Trump administration trying to turn the tables on the anti-government protests.
We'll have to pay attention to this story as it develops, but I want to turn to local politics here. Israel this week, the Knesset passed the state budget. This move shores up Prime Minister Netanyahu's governing coalition, and a failure to pass the budget would have resulted in elections. So we have a stable government here in Israel, I believe until 2026 when the next elections are up. It was a little bit shaky there when Itamar Ben-Gvir's party left, but he is now back in the government, and it looks like this government might actually see its full term.
Yeah, there's no reason to assume right now that this government's going to crash, and the fact that they passed the budget demonstrated the strength of the government. Passing the budget is always difficult for every government. If you recall, there was a point in which Netanyahu was in a rotation arrangement with Benny Gantz, who was his primary opponent and became the defense minister during the period of COVID. And Netanyahu used the budget as a trigger for an early election, basically refusing to pass a budget in order to get to an election. Here, Netanyahu, by passing the budget, has demonstrated that his government right now, which is a 68-member, ideologically aligned, right-of-center coalition, is strong. It's not going to be broken. So while you have protests in the streets, the majority of people in Israel have voted for this present government, and this government is strong, much stronger than the anti-government protesters want. And it's likely, like you said, that this government could remain in power until the elections that are scheduled for the end of 2026.
We're going to stick with the Knesset. More news out of the parliament this week. Israel's Knesset Thursday voting to change the composition of the Judicial Selection Committee. That's the body that appoints the country's judges. The opposition members left the Knesset during the vote. They did not participate in the ballot. And again, we mentioned before judicial reform. So this, I guess, I want you to explain. Is this the beginning of the judicial reform? Is it back on the table? Is this a victory for the government? What exactly happened here in this vote?
Yes, Netanyahu and his government learned a harsh lesson when they tried to introduce sweeping judicial reforms in the summer before October 7th. And we saw this is when these protest movement really started to pick up a lot of steam, with hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. Those protests are larger than the current protests, although the current protests are significant. Netanyahu had to roll back the judicial reforms. And this is actually a compromise agreement. This is not the arrangement that Netanyahu and Yariv Levin, the justice minister, wanted for the selection of justices. The situation in Israel, the way you pick judges, is much different than the United States. Basically, in the United States, the president of the United States selects a judge, and then they have to go through, Senate hearings in order to be confirmed. And in this way, over time, you have Democrats appoint some judges, Republicans appoint other judges, and many of the times when you have a Republican in office, you have a Democratic-controlled Senate, or vice versa. So in that case, what you're going to have is justices that represent the full array of the spectrum, some more liberal justices, some conservative justices, and most of the justices, whether they're more conservative or liberal, will be moderate candidates so they can get through the Senate confirmation process. Here in Israel, the court has a veto on all of the appointees to the court itself. So they're basically self-selecting the justices. The government has a minimized role in selecting who the justices are going to be. And the change that was presented here by Justice Minister Yariv Levin was that in the committee, in addition to having 3 justices from the Supreme Court, you also had 2 members of the Israeli Bar Association, where the lawyers are actually picking or are participating in the process of picking the justices. Now, it's a 9-man committee, so if you have 3 members of the court and then you've got 2 lawyers, the lawyers always vote with the court.
Right.
Okay, so now you have already 5 out of 9 members of the committee that are always ideologically aligned. You need 7 votes to confirm a judge. So if you've already got 5 before you even know who the candidates are, it makes it very hard for a conservative government to come in and to advance another candidate. It's just going to be rejected, vetoed out of hand. So here, what Levin is presenting is an idea whereby both the coalition and the opposition have a role in selecting who these other 2 members of the Judicial Selection Committee are going to be, basically shifting some, but not nearly all, of the balance back towards the political spectrum. And of course, the protesters are out there just saying, this is the end of democracy. They don't want the Israeli public or the people that are watching this program to understand, what change is actually being proposed, and to understand why that actually makes sense. They just want you to know that this is Netanyahu putting judicial reforms back on the table. It's the end of democracy. They think that judges not being able to appoint their own successors is the end of democracy. They think that the prime minister firing the head of the security services that reports to him is the end of democracy. They think that the prime minister having an attorney general that actually wants to defend the government instead of opposing the government is the end of democracy. It's actually judicial fascism, the way the system is working right now. Netanyahu, seeing what Trump is doing in the United States, how he's attacking the deep state, and recognizing that now is his opportunity to go ahead with this strong government that has now passed the budget and implement the policies that he's really wanted to implement the entire time.
So Prime Minister Netanyahu, in that same vein, this past week, took to the microphone in the Knesset, speaking about the fact that Israel will always remain a democracy, lashing out at the deep state. We talked about these issues last week, how Yair Lapid and former Supreme Court head Aaron Barak said that Israel's heading towards a civil war, in line with everything you just said, with the Kaplan protesters and all that. Let's listen to clips from Netanyahu's speech in the Knesset this week.
לא הדמוקרטיה בסכנה, שלטון הפקידים בסכנה, הדיפ סטייט בסכנה. לשיטתכם אין שום ערך לרצון העם שבחר בנו להנהיג את המדינה. מה פתאום שהעם יחליט? מי זה העם? מי זה אתם? הפקידים יחליטו. הם יחליטו במקום מיליוני אזרחים שהצביעו באופן חופשי ודמוקרטי בעד הממשלה שלנו.
So there you have Netanyahu saying that it's not democracy which is in danger, but the rule of the bureaucrats. That's what's in danger, and this whole deep state. They're the ones who need to be on the alert.
Yeah, this was a fiery speech, and it's clear that Netanyahu understands that he's in his last act. Now, we don't know how long this act is going to last. As we said, the next election is not necessarily scheduled until the beginning of November in 2026. So you basically have a year and a half. I don't think Netanyahu should necessarily depend on winning another election after that, although you never know. You can't count out Netanyahu, and we don't know how this war is going to end and what might be, we're just far away from an election. We can't think about it. But Netanyahu has been in power now for over 16 years, recognizing that this is his time. Like, if he's not going to accomplish these changes now, he might never get the opportunity. He sees what Trump is doing in the United States, how he is basically taking a pitchfork to the deep state in the U.S. He's taking his cues from there. He also wants the president to recognize that he is fighting the same war that Trump is fighting in the United States, because Trump could be looking over here and saying, look, I'm seeing protests in the streets. The newspapers there are saying that there's hundreds of thousands of people. Now, I think it's much less, by the way. I don't think you have hundreds of thousands of people. It is tens of thousands of people for sure. Trump could be looking at Netanyahu saying, Netanyahu, I see he's losing support. I don't know how strong he is, and I don't know if I should be supporting him. So Netanyahu is actually trying to mirror what Trump is doing, trying to mirror the language that Trump is using, sending a message also at the same time to Trump and his administration that the same efforts that Trump is undertaking to get rid of the deep state bureaucracies in the United States, that Netanyahu is finally, and he probably should have done this a long time ago, but finally trying to break the bureaucratic hold on the state of Israel, which I think is really in line with what most of the people in Israel want if it can be explained to them properly. Now, of course, the media is not going to do that.
For sure.
That's why JNS and others are so important.
Alex, we have time for one last news item here. Turning to the situation in Turkey, you've had nationwide protests over the last week plus. Anti-government protesters against the regime. You had the mayor of Istanbul arrested, 19 detained in these nationwide protests. Let's talk a little bit about that and how it impacts us here in Israel, the fact that people are coming out against President Erdogan there.
Well, you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that are out protesting Erdogan. When you talk about, people talk about, Netanyahu trying to end the rule of democracy here, and the opposition here is basically now trying to float the idea that Netanyahu is going to cancel the next election so he can just stay in power indefinitely. Erdogan is a dictator who's trying to stay in power indefinitely. They rig elections. He wants to be the dictator for life. He wants to establish an Islamic caliphate in the region. And remember, the Turkish had an empire. Turkey had an empire in the region. They used to control Israel before the British came in, the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey's in bad shape. The economy is really crumbling. Over the last several years under Erdogan, there's mass inflation. The currency has lost something like 80% of its value in the last years. And now Erdogan has arrested the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, and you're seeing massive protests. Erdogan was trying to even influence down to Israel. His HTS group, led by al-Jawani, is the one that pushed into Syria and threw out Bashar Assad. So for Israel, I think this is potentially very, very good news. We might see the fall of Iran. We might see the fall of Turkey. And hopefully in that vacuum that's created by the fall of these two malign influences in the region, you'll see the rise of the state of Israel as the emerging regional superpower.
Just before we go, just one piece of breaking news just reported. Prime Minister Netanyahu apparently is headed to Hungary this week to visit the capital there, Budapest.
Going to visit Viktor Orban, who's been a tremendous ally of Israel. I know that those in Western Europe don't really like Orban. They think that he's a dictator, he's a fascist. I'll tell you, I've been to Budapest just about a year ago, and it's one of the few places that a Jew can walk around with a yarmulke on his head and feel safe. You don't see Muslims walking around. There was actually a march that took place from the Great Synagogue in Budapest to the train station, which is where Hungarian Jews were deported from in 1944 to Auschwitz, towards the end of World War II. And it was a several kilometer march with thousands of people. Did not encounter even one anti-Israel protest. Can you imagine that happening in any other city in Europe? And we recall that the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu. If Netanyahu would touch down in Paris, he could be arrested.
Right.
Okay. And so Netanyahu is trying to show that he's not locked, that he can still travel. And so he's going to be touching down in Budapest, visiting Viktor Orban, and demonstrating that he can travel to a place where he's not going to face arrests from the hands of a biased International Criminal Court.
Make sure you keep it locked on to jns.org to follow that story, Netanyahu's trip to Budapest, and all the latest breaking news from Israel and the Middle East. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News, along with CEO of JNS, Alex Traiman. I want to give a shout out to our production team, Zach Sickerman, Esther Eden, Yuri Shvertsky. Ryan Lifshitz and Zach Zuckerman for all the work they do. Make sure you join us next week here on Jerusalem Minute, and check out all the wonderful shows on JNS TV. And as I said, jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel and the Middle East. Have a great week, everybody. See you next week on Jerusalem Minute here from the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. Have a great week.